Welcome back to City Speak. I'm your host, Dante Moreno. I'm the Finance Administration and Intergovernmental Relations Advocate at the National League of Cities. City Speak gives listeners an insider's view of what local leadership in America means today and features conversations with government leaders and policy experts regarding the biggest issues and challenges facing America's cities, towns, and villages. On May 29th, the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, proposed substantial changes to the Uniform Guidance, which governs federal grants and other forms of federal financial assistance. OMB's stated goals are to 1. Improve transparency and accountability, 2. Elevate existing guidance into formal regulations, and 3. Reduce the regulatory burden on federal grant administrators and recipients. The period to comment on these proposed changes ended on July 13th. There were almost 500,000 comments submitted. Now, OMB is legally required to review the comments and plans to implement the proposed changes starting on October 1st of this year. At the same time, we're seeing congressional members weighing in on the proposed changes on their end. We're joined today by the Mayor of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and NLC Board of Directors member, Toby Barker, to discuss these proposed changes and how they might impact municipalities, both small and large, if implemented. Mayor Barker, welcome to City Speak.
Hey, Dante, it's good to be with you.
Mayor Barker, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the proposed rule, can you give us an overview of Hattiesburg, Mississippi?
Hattiesburg is located in South Mississippi. We sit in 2 counties. We're about an hour and a half north of New Orleans. We have a population of 50,000, but in our 2-county area, we're almost 150,000. And so Hattiesburg is part of an MSA. It's one of the smaller MSAs in the country, but one of 4 in the state of Mississippi. And so we have 2 universities, the University of Southern Mississippi and William Carey University. And we have 59% of our population. This is a really neat thing about us. 59% of our population is either millennial or Gen Z, which is the highest concentration in that demographic in the South, aside from Columbia, South Carolina. So we're very proud of our young talent, and we're continually trying to go and find money to make the quality of life and their standard of living better for them every day.
Sounds like there's a lot going on in Hattiesburg. Does Hattiesburg receive any federal funding?
We do. So there's the things that we get every year. You know, the federal transit money. We get money through HUD in the form of CDBG as well as home funds. And then we also have been successful in getting some federal grants. We were awarded a CRISI grant and a BUILD grant in 2020. We were able to get a low-no grant a couple of years later, in addition to just the ARPA money that we received with everyone else. And so it's a big part of our budget and a big part of our strategy moving forward.
And I'll also note the proposed changes to Uniform Guidance will impact all of the discretionary fund that you all apply for and win. It will also impact formula grants that you receive, like CDBG and all of the other federal financial assistance programs. I know that we have spoken previously about the Uniform Guidance. Can you share a little about what has jumped out at you about these proposed changes?
Well, it's one of these things that you had to kind of read it twice to see, are they really proposing that? And for us, we have to already do so much reporting with the grants that we do have, both at the state and federal level. And I realize this only applies to federal grants, but we also receive a lot of state grants that we have to do reporting for as well. And so you're going to have an increased administrative burden to us. I mean, we have one grant administrator, and then we have people in various departments that do some of this reporting as well. And so you're talking about more of that on a process that is already very burdensome. And even if you get all these grants, the information and just the time and effort it takes to report on that, you're just talking about adding to that. And that's less time that we're not actually going and accomplishing the mission that the grant was given to us in the first place. I think the second thing is it really creates some uncertainty about when we receive a federal grant, are we going to be able to hang on to it through completion of the project? Because a lot of these are reimbursable grants. And you think about if the federal government is allowed to cancel a grant at any time, not because of compliance issues or because we aren't meeting those deliverables, but because, whatever administration comes in, they believe it no longer meets the national interest. We're concerned about spending all the money on the front end, whether to apply for the grant or to do engineering design, right-of-way acquisition. You get to bid, and then all of a sudden the grant is pulled from you, and that's a real uncertainty when you're talking about brick and mortar projects that we maybe start, but then suddenly it's not there anymore. What happens to that reimbursable grant? And so how then do we have to cover that funding gap? Is that going to make us a little bit more hesitant to go after grants that we should be very aggressive with? And so, and I think I think it creates a lot of uncertainty about what happens if suddenly the national interest changes depending on who's in the White House or who's in Congress. I would also say that from a big picture point of view, we believe that federal grant making, and we saw this with the bipartisan infrastructure law, it should be focused on the quality of your project, on a policy or an outcome. It shouldn't be based on the politics of the day. We have enough of that already. And so you're introducing a philosophy that is incredibly subjective and potentially very politically biased, instead of just having merit-based applications that communities can go apply for. And I think this is I think that's kind of a big picture danger, I think, just nationwide, that doesn't just affect Hattiesburg, but it really does cut to the heart of what every mayor and city councilman and board of aldermen is trying to do.
Thank you for that. And you actually mentioned that Hattiesburg also receives state funding. And I know a lot of the state funding that you may receive actually originates from the federal government, goes through the state, and then comes to you. So you're reporting to the state, but it's really federal money. And we're really concerned, or we're seeing concerns pop up that that's going to slow down that process too, because the state is going to have to comply with new federal changes, and that might delay the city receiving those funds. And so it's sort of on those two levels of, they feel like two tranches of funding, but they both might be impacted, which I think was an interesting point for you to bring up. You also mentioned the mid-award, you mentioned the mid-award grant terminations. I know that cities, unlike perhaps the federal government, you all balance your budgets, every budget cycle. You have this budget that you agree to at the beginning of your fiscal year. If you have a grant canceled in the middle of your fiscal year, you were promised X amount of money, you've built 30% of it, what would you do?
We would have to either delay another project to try and finish this one, or we would leave it unfinished. It really does complicate just the idea of planning with certainty when you go into budget season, or when you just go through the daily course of events and you're dealing with contractors who, if your money's suddenly gone in the middle of a project, I mean, they could just say the city's not, is defaulting on the project. And it's a very slippery slope. And I think any mayor can understand how that's a really dangerous thing to be out there.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen questions pop up from cities of, do we have to rewrite all of our all our contracts with contractors and our engineers moving forward, saying, if we have this grant canceled, that means we're probably going to have to cancel this contract. And that will be a really interesting development.
Well, and I think it's important to also know that it's not exactly easy already. I know just with FTA funding, again, I think everybody that works probably at these federal agencies are good people. And I think that, and no one is against accountability and ensuring that there are people who are complying with grants, though I would put the mayors of America's cities, towns, and villages at the very top in terms of being able to run their cities efficiently, because like you said, we do have to balance budgets. So you're talking about a process that's already complicated. I mean, whether it's having to follow every HUD requirement to the letter, and even some of that's based on interpretation of your local field office. And so you're talking about a cumbersome process and making it even harder. I think about just the ARPA funds that we received. Mississippi was the only state, to my knowledge, that provided a state matching grant with its ARPA dollars if we spent our money on infrastructure. And so our $12.8 million from federal ARPA became over $20 million because the state provided the matching grant. The level of reporting that we had to do on that, and I understand it, but we're talking, it really consumed a lot of staff time, and still is, as we try to spend that money before the end of the year. And so and you're talking about adding even more to it, it's not practical, and I believe it's unnecessary.
Thank you for that. We're talking about federal grant reform right now, and I'll share that NLC is a big supporter of federal grant reform. You've just mentioned that it is difficult to apply for grants. Many cities have federal grant writers on staff. Many cities have folks who their sole job is figuring out the 5 million requirements it takes to remain in compliance to different federal grants. And at the beginning of this call, you mentioned the different federal grants that you have to know about as the mayor of Hattiesburg, because you get different types of federal grants to do infrastructure, to do housing, to provide the services that you need to have a thriving community. What would you say? So OMB, when they released this in May, it was a 412-page book of reforms for the federal grant community. What would you say if you got to sit down with OMB or your members of Congress? What would you prioritize in federal grant reform?
I think the focus should be on streamlining provisions. And look, out of all 400 plus pages, not everything is bad. I mean, there's some things in there that I think we're all supportive of, but the overall changes would increase the workload. I don't think it saves the federal government any money. I think it just makes us spend more money on consultants to have to report things. Cities are stewards of taxpayer dollars, both locally, state, federal, and funds that are having to be used on consultants to do excessive, burdensome reporting requirements are taking away from the actual mission of those grants, whether it's filling potholes or, in our case, building grade-separated rail crossings or trying to provide those necessary services and housing that our residents actually need that can better the quality of life of our city.
I mentioned at the beginning of this call that there was a comment period. It was July 13th that passed. I know Hattiesburg was one of the almost 500,000 recipients who reached out to OMB to share how this, rule would impact the city. NLC provided comments as well. But we're still missing a lot of communities who did not submit comments, who may not have reached out to their members of Congress yet, who may not see how this really complicated book of reforms impacts their community as you all think about water infrastructure and roads and bridges and potholes. What would you say to other mayors who are not yet engaged on the issue about why this matters to them?
We depend a lot on you and the National League of Cities staff to go and advocate on behalf of 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across America. But I don't think anything is more effective than a mayor or an alderman or a council person reaching out to their individual member of Congress and saying and telling that story. This will make our lives harder and not really accomplish anything in terms of transparency. And nothing beats you calling your member's chief of staff, or if you have their cell phone number, and we're lucky enough in Mississippi that we can really know our two senators and our congressmen. And my message to every mayor is get on the phone, take 5 minutes, shoot a text message, something, because the more members hear this, the more they convey that to the administration, OMB. I think about proposals back in 2021 where they were going to change the population requirements to be an MSA, and that would have cut out Hattiesburg from being considered, one of those almost 400 MSAs. But enough cities made that an issue, and they talked to the member of Congress, and members of Congress responded, and they voiced their opposition as well. I mean, there's power when we all speak with one voice, when we tell our story, and I hope that every mayor that's listening will take that to heart and take action.
We're coming into August recess season where your members of Congress, will be back home in your state, in your district. Does Hattiesburg have any plans to meet with your members of Congress while they're home for recess?
Well, I know Senator Wicker is speaking in my city at the end of August, and so we'll be there and we'll talk with him. But again, we are lucky enough to have cell phone numbers of both our senators and our congressmen, and all of them are willing to speak to us and make themselves available. And so I venture to guess that most members of Congress have that sort of availability for their cities. And we should take advantage of that, or we should find out what their schedule is and try to, pull them aside. I think we have to be smart about it. I'm not a big believer in calling your person out publicly on social media, but I do think that a direct conversation goes a long way.
Mayor Toby Barker, thank you so much for stopping by City Speak today and breaking down how these proposed changes would impact communities. To our listeners, we encourage you to reach out, call, email, text, like the mayor said, your members of Congress and their staff, and tell them how the proposed changes will impact your communities. If you would like more information, you can visit nlc.org/advocacy to find resources on the proposed changes, including explainer blogs, a webinar recording, and a template action letter to help you reach out to your members of Congress. If you have any questions or would like more information, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at advocacy@nlc.org. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to City Speak with Clarence Anthony. If you like this show, let us know. Share this episode with your friends and make sure to subscribe. We're curious to hear what you think, what you want more of, and how we can improve. If you have feedback or an idea for a guest you'd like Clarence to sit down with, send us your thoughts at cityspeakpodcast@nlc.org. Join us next month for a new episode. Like and subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.